So as I said, as I'm getting deeper into these trigonometric transformations, right, there's a lot of transformations that can be applied to these functions. So in order to have that understanding for my next videos, I'm going to be showing you what transformations are. So the first thing that we can have when we're doing transformations are reflections. Reflections. Right? Whenever we're doing reflections, we're talking about coordinates x and y. Right? If we say a reflection over the x-axis, right? We say that our x will be constant, however, our y will change. And we have a reflection over the x-axis. However, whenever we're talking about a reflection over the y-axis, right? Reflection. Your x will change, and your y will be the same. Right? Make sure you guys copy this down if you're taking notes. So, besides from reflections, we have what we call rotations. I'm not getting too deep in rotations on my video, but it's important that you guys know. Alright? So, rotations, we can have a 90-degree rotations, counter or clockwise. Counter or clockwise. We can either have 180-degree counter or clockwise. Right, we can also have a 270-degree, 270-degree both counter, or we can have a 360-degree both counter or clockwise. Or clockwise. Counter and clockwise. What you guys need to know is what happens to the coordinates, and every time we're talking about rotations or reflections. When we're talking about 90 degrees, right? Beat this here. When we're talking about 90 degrees, and then we have the x and the y. What happens is that these coordinates switch, and your x will become negative whenever it's clockwise. Right? And when we're talking with counterclockwise, it will be the same. However, now our y will be negative. And when we're talking about 180, what happens is if you have your x and your y, what happens is now you have negative x, negative y. Right? When we're talking about that 180, when we're talking about this 270 right here, what happens is basically the opposite. So now you're going to have your y, negative, and your x. This is I'm always starting from the clockwise, right? But then you flip it over, and then in the counter and clockwise for the 180, it doesn't change, but for the 270, what changes is that it's basically the opposite from 90 degrees. The counters, and it's basically one of the opposite of each other. And for 360, is all kept constant. Kept constant for the 360. Right? So what you have to know is that the switch, if you talk about counter or clockwise, right? I'm going to circle clockwise because then you just flip it. And of course, for 360 and 180 degrees, so not much changes, but from the 90 into 70 degrees, a lot changes. Thank you all. Guilherme de Castro.